Om Stapakaya Chadharmasya Sarvadharma Sarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha Mangalam Gurudevaya Devye Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindevyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Reva Param Brahman Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Turn these lights on. May help as the sun goes down. So we're very lucky we have an actual very nice warm evening. The weather's been changing. And last satsang we actually did inside. It was because during Navaratri. We may have to switch to doing them inside during the cold season. But we're very lucky today. So what I was thinking to do, we were going to continue, as I was mentioning before we started, we were going to continue from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th Skanda, the prayers of Lord Brahma, but I didn't have the time to give them the proper attention to translate. So it's always an ever fascinating reservoir of information, and it's in the complete words of Swami Vivekananda. And so I'm going to read a little bit from the Bhakti Yoga. The Bhakti Yoga is a very small. Is it the smallest, or Karma Yoga smaller? I think. Of the four yogas is kind of his seminal, most important works. He put his so much intention into these four group, but he didn't sit down and write them. Their lectures. He gave a series of lectures, knowing that they'd be transcribed and put into these books. So Jnana Yoga is considered a masterpiece. Raja Yoga has his translation and commentary on the Yoga Sutra, also spectacular. But Bhakti Yoga is small but very profound, right? And he both deals with kind of the abstruse philosophy because he's presenting it to an intellectual Western audience that doesn't have an orientation towards, puja and mantras and images. So, can you leave it? Can you tie that open? Thank you. And so he's having to, in a certain sense, sometimes you see it sometime where he's not justifying, but he's explaining, real classical Hindu sadhana philosophy to people, intelligent, learned people, but people who are intelligent and learned, but not about anything about Hindu philosophy. And I realized, I may have mentioned this a while back when we were reading from Swami Vivekananda's works, that for me I had a bit of a interpretation breakthrough, right? A principle, right? When I realized, of course I can't assume what Swami Vivekananda was doing, but I realized that he's not exactly like revealing a new philosophy to a group of disciples. He's explaining Hinduism and Hindu practices to people who don't know anything about it. So all of a sudden, like the Ishtadevata, right? It's like we have his actually in this little section, I think, called the Ishtadevata, where we begin to hear this term, the chosen ideal, right? Well, and sometimes we think that's not a very nice translation, right? But it's a perfect translation if you're trying to explain to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, right? How, you have to understand it's not dumbing down. These are smart people, educated people, but explaining when you're trying to explain to an educated person something they don't know anything about. Right, so we have to. So it's in the benefit of that. All of us know something. We've been in this tradition a long time. All of us here, right? But it's good to know some foundational principles. Not only is it give insight into our own spiritual life, but also is historical. Right? It goes in, this is the first time that these ideas are presented in a concrete way in the Western world, right? And so it's a presupposition of a lot of the people we talk to. This is the language we've now the lingo, I guess, or the jargon that Western yoga, Hindu spiritual circles uses, in a certain sense was established with these talks, right? This is the generation that began to establish one aspect of this. So it's also to me, it's very historical. Yes.
Where were they?
It's a good question. This Bhakti Yoga, I'm not sure where these were spoken. Do you know where Bhakti Yoga was spoken?
Different lectures in different cities.
Yeah, but usually there were like a series of talks, Like I don't remember, but they were given. Some of them were given in London. I know some point. A lot of the Jnana Yoga was given in San Francisco. If I remember properly, right? So these were big public gatherings, right? So it's different if like the guru is describing technique and teachings and revelations to a disciple, right? These are public talks to a learned audience, but learned in a certain sense, right? Swami Vivekananda even himself used this term learned ignorance, right? Right? They're learned, but they don't know anything. That's a problem, right? And their background, if they had interest, it was through the transcendentalists, right? And beginning to the transcendentalist movement. Some of it happened after Swamiji, of course, and then theosophy, and let's see, science of healing, relation to the scriptures. No, those Christian Science. A lot of these things were what people were hearing, right? And so Swamiji was explaining more classical, traditional ideas and justifying. And Masons, you know, all these type of like esoteric or semi-esoteric, pseudo-esoteric traditions, right? But I was going to, before we start, I wanted to read it's a very small, it takes not even half a page, like 2 paragraphs, called Why We Disagree. It was given on September 15th, 1893. So this is on September 11th, 1893, he gave his famous opening address, right? Sisters and Brothers of America, and got that rousing ovation. He gave very like that. And then a couple days, he had to wait 4 days, right, for his next talk. But he he had to give some sort of a response, right? They were like, you know, and if you've ever seen a picture of the audience at the Parliament of Religion, there's like 100 people on stage. It's a lot of people, you know. And so people they got a chance to speak, to give their main presentation and read their papers, right? But then they all had to respond to each other. And I've been in such thing where people like, you know, it's like, describe your view of the afterlife in Hinduism. And then you give, and then pass it down, and then pass down the mic to the Buddhist, and then pass it down the mic to the rabbi. You know, it's like everybody, and then can you respond to that and give an opinion? So we don't know what, the records have been kept of what other people spoke, right? There's some very important speakers there. But this is important, because this is just whatever happened between September 11th and September 15th. This is Swamiji Vivekananda's response, which is interesting. Later, he gives a response where he says, in another talk, right, I think towards the end of the Parliament, he says, I've been introduced that I'm now going to criticize Buddhism, right? Because that's the way they did it. They're like, now the Buddhist speaker spoke. Oh, great! Swami Vivekananda, the Hindu, will now criticize Buddhism. Yes. And he says, who am I to criticize he who I worship as God? You know, it's like he gave a beautiful and very sharp, but you could see his mood coming, you know. But this is very interesting. I think it's a good setup for some of the things Swamiji says in the Bhakti Yoga discussion. I will tell you a little story. You have heard the eloquent speakers who has just finished say, let us cease from abusing each other. And he was very sorry that there should always be such a variance. But I shall tell you a story which will illustrate the cause of this variance. A frog lived in a well. It had lived there for a long time. It was born there and brought up there, and yet it was a little, small frog. Of course, the evolutionists were not there to tell him whether the frog had lost its eyes or not, but for our story's sake, we must take it for granted that it had eyes, and that every day it cleansed the water of all the worms and bacillia, or bacilli? Bacteria, anyway, that lived there, with an energy that would do credit to our modern bacteriologists. In this way, it went on to become a little sleek and fat. Well, one day another frog, which lived in the sea, came and fell into the well. So I love it that he starts it, but the evolutionists weren't there to tell him. You know, it's like you can see the mood of that period of time also, and all the people speaking and arguing with each other, right? So one day another frog, which lived in the sea, came and fell into that well. Where are you from? I'm from the sea. The sea? How big is that? Is it as big as my well? And it took a leap from one side of the well to the other. Is it this big? You know, this big? Okay. Then the frog took another leap. My friend, said the frog from the sea, how can you compare the sea with your little well? Then the frog took another leap and asked, is your sea so big? Is this big? What nonsense you speak to compare the sea with your well. But, said the frog of the well, nothing can be bigger than my well. There can be nothing bigger than this. This fellow is a liar, so turn him out. That has been the difficulty all the while, right? You know, So that's Swamiji's response to the whole thing. Everybody is comparing the infinite to their well, right? And we cannot even conceive of anything beyond it, right? Is it, most you can think, I mean, theoretical case, is it twice as big as my well? You know, it's like, to even say such a thing to somebody who knows the sea, or even if you don't know the sea, if you know the idea of the ocean, it seems ridiculous, right? But this is the case of limited understanding, or that breeds fanaticism and like this, right? I am a Hindu. I am sitting in my own little well and thinking the whole world is my little well. The Christian sits in his little well and thinks the whole world is his well. The Mohammedan sits in his little well and thinks that is the whole world. I have to thank you of America for this great attempt you are making to break down the barriers of this little world of ours. And I hope that in the future the Lord will help you accomplish your purpose. So, meaning the Parliament of Religions, right? But it's interesting, the history of the Parliament of Religion was not really to show the universality of religion, right, or the common denominator of religion. Maybe there's some intellectuals in the group that they're very liberal, people of liberal versions of the church, you know, that were in that in that mode. But really, they're trying to actually show the superiority of Western Christianity. Right, and we've mentioned this before. There was the central theme of the Parliament of the Parliament of Religion is part of the World Fair in Chicago, and the theme of the World Fair was the central organizing theme was called the Great White Way. Right, it was a road that went from one side to the other, right, and in it, along it showed the evolution of humanity. So in the beginning, there was these black tribes, villages were constructed of the black African tribes, right? And then it went to India and China and the Chinamen, and it's like in their quaint little huts and their metalworking, and this happened slowly back to Europe, and it ended with Chicago, 1893. It's like the conclusion of evolution of society and culture itself was the World Fair in Chicago. It was like, and so similarly, the Parliament of Religion, one of the themes was the evolution of religion itself, right, through the higher and higher stages, and we find it in some of the writings or some of the talks at the Parliament. We hear things like, and maybe we've even heard some of these in our early religious studies discussions, in school and like that, is that from polytheism, you move forward to monotheism. Right, it's like, and so I had one time a Buddhist in one of my classes says, if from polytheism, many gods, to one God, if that's a big step forward, then Buddhism the next step to no God. That simplifies it even more. That's the next evolution. If that's the movement, but that's a weird way of structuring it, right? It's a presupposition and a way. So anyway, Swamiji's discussion, and then I don't know. I mean, I can't speak completely authoritatively, but as far as I know. Then Swami, the next talk he gave a few days later on the 19th, when he gave his official presentation, right? And I don't think, if I'm remembering properly, he wasn't prepared for it, because he spoke. Actually, if you think the complete works, mostly it's him speaking extemporaneously, right? Without notes, without much preparation, right? He'd get up and speak, right? We know later he revealed that at night, in the middle of the night, he'd hear a voice telling him what to say in his ear, and the next day he'd lecture on that topic, right? So he was getting information from other sources, and of course his huge education like that, and training, illumined consciousness, but he didn't prepare. And at this conference, people were preparing and open, and so maybe in those days he actually wrote a prepared paper called Hinduism, which was my original idea of speaking on today, was the Hinduism paper. But I realized, I think actually we one time spoke on it. Maybe not super in depth, but I think it's in our podcast. Like, rather than just repeating the same thing again, I decided to jump from that to his Bhakti Yoga, which is one of our favorite topics, obviously. And it's a topic of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So, which we've been talking on for years, It's the theme of Bhakti Yoga. So Swamiji starts. I'm reading from the Bhakti Yoga in a version called the Vivekananda, the Yogas and Other Works, which is an edition by Swami Nikilananda, and it's slightly edited differently. The English is also slightly different. If you get the little book Bhakti Yoga, it may be slightly different. It's slightly different editing. It's very nice editing though. I like it. Very classic. Bhakti Yoga. This is his definition. Bhakti Yoga is a real, genuine search after the Lord. A search beginning, continuing, and ending in love. That's a very nice definition. That's like the best definition. And I went thinking of this, and he's going to give different definitions of different rishis and philosophers of the past. I was remembering in the Bhakti Sutra, right, in the Bhakti Sutra of Narada Muni, he also says Bhakti Yoga. There's many definitions of Bhakti Yoga, and he gives a bunch of people's definitions. I'll read a few of these definitions. Its characteristics are stated variously according to various views. Puja Adisha, Anugraha, Parasharaha. Bhakti is fondness for worship and the like, according to Vyasa. So Vyasa's definition is the joy that one gets in devotion activity like worship and puja and chanting. That's Bhakti. Right? According to Gargamuni, Kata Adi Iti Gargaha. Discussions talking about God, that is Bhakti. Getting pleasure in talking about God. Sandaliya also has his own Bhakti Sutra, the Bhakti Sutra of Sandaliya. Sandaliya says, Bhakti is pleasure in the self without obstruction, according to Sandaliya. But then it says, but Narada, the speaker, he says, it is dedicating all actions to God and extreme anguish in forgetting God. Right? When everything is for God, and the idea of any forgetfulness of God is excruciating. Then he says the examples of this are the gopis of Raj, and then he goes into it goes from 1 to 108 very quickly when he starts talking about the gopis, right? But this is his, and he also gives a padama. What is it? The other definitions at the beginning. Tasmin Padama Prema Pada Prema Sarupa. Its nature of supreme love, right? That's his Amrita Sarupa Cha, and it's also nature is nectar. It's deathless, immortal, nectar giving, right? It goes in. One gives one side. He begins to define it by giving its qualities, what its effect. It makes one immortal, makes one blissful, right? So Swamiji, and also because he's no less of a rishi as Narada, Garga, Sandaliya, and Vyasa, right? You see in the first sentence he defines it perfectly. Bhakti Yoga is a real, genuine search after the Lord, a search beginning, continuing, and ending in love. One single moment of the madness of extreme love of God brings us eternal freedom. One single moment of the madness of extreme love for God brings us eternal freedom. Bhakti is intense love for God, says Narada. I'm quoting, right? He's himself quoting Narada Muni here. In his Bhakti aphorisms. When a man gets it, he loves all, hates none. He becomes satisfied forever. Tripti Bhava, Amrita Bhava. These are verses from the Bhakti Sutra. He's actually very interesting. Swamiji, if you analyze his talks, he's continuously quoting scripture. Sometimes he doesn't give. Sometimes here he says Narada says, but many times, and you realize, that they should put quotes around that, because that's from this Upanishad, and this is from the Yoga. And I read in my readings, in some lost verse in some end of some text, I go, that's Swamiji said that. That's where he got. That's direct quote. There's many of those type of things. But here is an example of him quoting Narada Bhakti Sutra. When a man gets it, he loves all, hates none. He becomes satisfied forever. This love cannot be reduced to any earthly benefit. These are also quotes from the Narada Bhakti Sutra. Because so long as worldly desires last, that kind of love does not arise. This love cannot be reduced to any earthly benefit. So this is one thing is that we see, and some people will critics of religion will sometimes criticize that religion is to get some benefit. Right. Sometimes it's obvious, like God give me stuff, right? Right. Prakash do a very good impersonator of the female TV minister. She's very good. It's like you can pray to God for stuff. He does it very, very perfectly. He has the whole routine down. But it's not a routine. He's actually just literally describing what he heard her say. And so that's embarrassing at face value, right? But then you go. Swami Vivekananda would in his discipleship talk, he says that even the desire for heaven, the desire for children, the desire for health, the desire for pleasure, the desire for happiness, desire for not going to hell, these are all good things. Heaven, happiness, children, health, not going to hell. These are all seem like good. Given the choice between going to hell and not going to hell, I think it's a natural thing to not to go to hell, right? It's a good thing, right? But these aren't. He says these are not the same thing as bhakti, right? These are the content and the focus of much of religion. That's no doubt, and it's mixed in with bhakti. That's a problem sometimes. But we want to see bhakti as it is, love for love's sake. Swamiji will also say, right? Not love for something, not love for even happiness. Right, because you see many, like the gopis that Narada quotes, right? The gopis got misery for their love, but they're worshipped for eternity because their misery is inconceivably greater than our material happiness. Bhakti is greater than karma, greater than jnana, greater than yoga. So he's quoting, right, Narada and the like, right? So this is a big thing because we always think of the four yogas on Vivekananda: Bhakti, Karma, Jnana, and Raja, or here yoga. Right? Here's Bhakti is greater than Karma, means Karma Yoga, right? Greater than Jnana, and greater than Yoga here refers to Raja Yoga. Because these have in view the attainment of an object, while Bhakti is its own fruition, its own means and its own ends. Also quoting Narada Bhakti Sutra. Right. So this is why is it superior, right? Because sometimes to say something's greater than something, you have to understand it's not necessarily criticizing something. What in which way do you mean it's greater? Here it means because it's not a means to an end. Bhakti is not. Jnana is a mean to liberation. Yoga is a mean to siddhi, or nirvana. Karma is a mean to type. There's always you do something or attain something to get something. Right, bhakti. What do you get by bhakti? You get bhakti, right? That's the point. It's both, and Swamiji also say it's both the means and the ends. Bhakti has been the one constant theme of our sages. Apart from the special writers on bhakti such as Sandaliya and Narada, that we quote here, the great commentaries on the Vyasa Sutra, evident advocates of jnana, have also something very suggestive to say about love. Even the commentators on the Brahma Sutra. Right? You can imagine Narada Muni is only going to speak about bhakti, but Vyasa, Shankara, Ramana, the sages who spoke on the Brahma Sutra, also in their commentaries on Brahma Sutra talk about bhakti. That's the important thing, because you cannot separate. Yeah. Even when those commentators are anxious to explain many, if not all the texts, so that to make them import as some sort of dry knowledge, the sutra, in the chapter on worship especially, do not lend themselves to be easily manipulated in that fashion. So even those philosophers that have an agenda to make every verse mean dry, Swamiji's this dry knowledge, right? Yeah. Right. But still, there's verses you can't get it. There's verses about puja, the worship about devotion, and even in the Brahma Sutra. So the commentators had to speak about that, even if they can try in a way that to hide the devotion, the emotional devotional content. There is not really so much difference between jnana and bhakti as people sometimes imagine. We shall see as we go on that in the end they converge and finally meet in the same point. So also it is with Raja Yoga, which, when pursued as a means to attain liberation, and not, unfortunately, as it frequently become, in the hands of charlatans and mystery mongers, as an instrument to hoodwink the unwary, leads us to the same goal. Even Raja Yoga leads to that same goal, unless it's in the hands of the charlatans. Which are meant to fool people through magic powers and displays and like this, you know. One great advantage of bhakti is that it is the easiest and the most natural way to reach the great divine end in view. So this is something that's said many places, that bhakti is the easiest. But by saying it's easiest does not mean that it's like the simplest. Right, something is, you're a simple person. You don't know many qualities. We'll give you something easy to do, right? Sometimes here in the yogic and Vedantic community, right, a way of dismissing bhakti for the simpletons, those who don't have the intellectual capacity to practice sophisticated forms of inquiry and like this, you know, or. And that's not what's meant by easiest. Here, easiest means it's easy because it's the most natural, like it's the nature of a river to flow down, right? You know, so it's so like if you tell water, you need to flow upward to attain the goal. You know, if that's true, maybe it can be done. You have to dam it and create a whole series of complicated structures to make water go up, and then you have to maybe steam it, and you have all this stuff. Maybe the goal of a river is to reach the mountain, in which case complicated things have to be done, right? But if the goal of the river actually is to meet the ocean, which seems to be a better metaphor, right? The river is rushing towards the ocean, not rushing towards the mountain, right? Therefore, then it's the most natural to do so. To long to do what's natural is in that sense the easiest thing, not the most, not the simpleton type of thing, you know. And also we've joked about this before because we've heard people say it that well, I'm very intelligent, therefore I don't practice Bhakti Yoga, right? Right. That's a very right, and they don't even, sometimes you don't even see, maybe they don't even realize that they're saying it. But if you listen to what they're saying, you know, kind of poke at it a little bit and see what it actually says. They're saying, because I'm very smart, I'm doing the difficult thing. Right, and so some people would say that a smart person does the easy thing, right? Find out what's the easiest way to get to the goal and does that, right? So that's another. So it's interesting that we have maybe we don't, because we've been fighting this trend for our entire adult life, the anti-bhakti movement, right? You know, so but it's the prejudice against devotion is. And sometimes Swami Vivekananda you wave the Jnana Yoga to defend your position, but Swamiji does not think like this. He was a great devotee. There is not so much difference between jnana and bhakti as people sometimes imagine. I'm sorry, no. One great advantage of bhakti is that it is the easiest and the most natural way to reach the goal, the great divine end in view. Its great disadvantage, there is a disadvantage, like we were discussing this morning over our coffee. Its great disadvantage is that in its lower forms, it oftentimes degenerates into hideous fanaticism. This is its drawback. And actually, there's like a fanatical jnani. What's his fanaticism? My view is superior. That's about. It doesn't get much more than that, right? But not like a strong preaching and a criticism and just blowing up of temples or whatever, you know, whatever the bhakti in its lower forms, right? This is not by the high definition. Some of you will go into that, but it's an important thing. Its great disadvantage is that in its lower forms, it oftentimes degenerates into hideous fanaticism. The fanatical crew in Hinduism or Mohammedanism or in Christianity have always been almost exclusively recruited from these worshippers on the lower planes of bhakti. So this is what our discussion was this morning over tea. Why is it? Just taking this idea that fanaticism often comes from the lower forms of bhakti. Right, we're discussing why that was, and we have a couple different reasons. What was yours? One possible I think yours was that in
Isn't bhakti.
well, it's devotion, right? But it's not. That's why there's different levels of devotion, of course, right? And one potential is that without devotional practices, without sadhana, right? Then our sentiments, our mind, our emotions, our mind, our intellect, our aspirations are not pure. We have to purify, and so if you have that same emotion without purification, that can lead, perhaps one possible way of leading to can lead to fanaticism. You remember what yours?
Yeah, that it becomes embedded in like a belief. So when you have
Yes.
different sects, and then it becomes.
Yeah, that's the thing. Pretty soon, belief, bhakti is not, devotion is not necessarily experiential anymore. It becomes, or another thing we also said that, like, if somebody, like, if you're suffering and somebody comes and saves you, right? You know, and you have an emotional, like, wow, Jesus saved me. You have that peak experience, for instance. That's just an example, right? It's and so that's a very powerful transformative experience, whatever that experience is, the born again or saved experiences in modern evangelical forms of Christianity, right? You cannot deny its emotional content, right? And so, who saved you? Jesus saved me, right? And not Ramakrishna didn't save me, Muhammad didn't save me, Buddha didn't save me, Isis didn't save me, and Kali did, some goddess and that we unknown thing. Right, it becomes, and then you have a religion that preaches Jesus will save you, and then you experience it. Oh, Jesus saved me, right? And pretty soon that can also be a generating factor, perhaps, right? So Swamiji says, and here he says very nice. He says, that singleness of attachment called nishta to the loved object, without which no genuine love can grow, is very often also the cause of the denunciation of everything else, nishta. And so that's a foundational part of bhakti, one-pointed devotion, focus, right? And in Yoga Sutra, it's like pouring oil from one to another, complete focus, without any, and like the gopis, they only love Krishna, right? So, they're given the perfect example of Ishta. They call it Ishtanishta, or Hanuman. He's considered an example of Ishtanishta, complete focus on the ideal, right? But if you have that complete focus on the ideal without a knowledge of that ideal is one face, one aspect, one revelation, one manifestation, one access point to the infinite, if you don't think that or know that or understand that, then pretty soon it becomes the only way. And then he says that it becomes the cause of denunciation of everything else, right? And so in another place, Swami Vivekananda says that in order to feel tall, some people will cut off other people's heads, right? And so he describes that as fanaticism, right? And religious bigotry, right? There's other religious views, other religions, but even pretty soon it's not just other religions. These are big enough categories, right? But pretty soon it's like, oh, somebody of a different guru, or even the same guru lineage, but they have a slightly different interpretation of a technique, or they put Jai instead of Shri in front of something, and pretty soon that becomes one's absolutely evil and the other one's absolutely good. And the differences are almost insignificant, right? Because we need to feel devoted, we need to feel focused, right? And sometimes unless we get that inner spiritual taste and realization, we don't have nishta. Nishta comes from, we shouldn't just want nishta. You have to, it's good to want to fall in love with somebody, but when you actually fall in love with somebody, then your mind automatically goes to them, right? Until then you think, oh, I need to fall in love with them. So maybe it's like everybody else is ugly and horrendous and horrible and they smell bad, and only this person's good, right? Until you get you fake it until you feel it, type thing, And so the idea of belittling everything in order to keep yourself focused, and that often happens. And maybe there's a place for that, Sri Ramakrishna, but there's a place for it, but it should be done with great caution, right, and common sense, right, and a generosity of heart. Like Sri Ramakrishna said, in the beginning you have to, a seedling has to be fenced on 4 sides. Otherwise every goat will come and cow and goat will eat it, right? It won't survive. Even bunny rabbits here. We don't put fences over stuff are gophers and bunny rabbits, and one grasshopper can get rid of something we've tended for months. A little plant. We finally put it in the ground after raising from seed, and then one night they're all eaten by one grasshopper. 6 months work gone, right? So sometimes it's good. You have to create like no grasshoppers, death to grasshoppers. It's like, and so sometimes we need to. It's not that we should mix indiscriminately when we're not mature, right? Because you become confused. We don't have the focus yet. We don't have nishta because we haven't experienced. If we create nishta, we have regulations and rules and principles and guidance, and sometimes our guru bhais and don't, careful, that person's Maya, don't listen to them, they ruin your faith, right? Hearing too many different philosophies will confuse you perhaps in the beginning stages, right? What I said, this should be done with a little bit of generosity of heart. It shouldn't be because they're evil, horrible, miserable, fallen, like offensive or whatever, you fill in whatever the word is, right? Disloyal, whatever the word is, right? It's because we're being careful. We're nurturing a conception, we're nurturing a practice, and therefore we're being careful, not because everybody else is horrible, right? And then Sri Ramakrishna, and to use the same example of the plant that's been fenced on four sides, eventually when the plant is strong, becomes a tree, you take down the fence. If you don't, the fence won't fall down. The tree gets big enough, right? And then the very animals that you were protected from will take shelter of that tree. The goats and cows will in the hot day will go underneath that tree. They may nibble on the bark, but it doesn't harm anything. A few leaves get okay. So it's not so protecting a plant from goats and cows isn't because goats and cows are horrible. It's because the plant is young. Right. If we're being careful, it's because we're still not strong, not because everything else is horrible. Right. That's what I mean by even if we have to be careful, we should do it with a generosity, not a fanaticism. That's the danger. The problem that it often becomes fanaticism. All the weak and undeveloped minds in every religion or country have only one way of loving their own ideal, and that is to hate every other ideal. So this is the love. The way you love one is to hate the others. Right? That's Swamiji's. Cut off the heads in order to feel tall. Right? Are we still on? Good. So that's a very big. Of course, think of his audience. Behind him is 70 people in liturgical outfits. In front of him are the intellectuals, the open-minded intellectuals of the time. Right? He's giving his. I'm sorry, he's not the parliamentary religion anymore. I'm still at the parliament, but he's giving his critique. This is his observation of what's the cause of this. All the weak and undeveloped minds of every religion or country have only one way of loving their own ideal, and that is to hate every other ideal. Herein is the explanation of why the same man who is so lovingly attached to his own idea of God, so devoted to his own ideal of religion, becomes a howling fanatic as soon as he sees or hears anything of any other ideal. That's very interesting. Somebody who loves God so much, so devoted, so pious, but becomes a howling fanatic as soon as they're in contact with something different. I myself we've all seen this, but I can go back in my own emotional Rolodex of my life, you see, and you always, and we try to be very magnanimous at heart as the children of Sri Ramakrishna, and try to see, but at least they're focused, at least they're devoted to God, they love God, right? We try to think like that. We try to see it in best light, and Sri Ramakrishna, anybody who's sincere eventually finds God. We're all stages, we don't want to be too pejorative and dismiss them, but we don't want to just like fight. Because important than that, the fighting words, when somebody makes such a statement, but it's true. This kind of love is somewhat like a canine instinct of guarding the master's property from intruders, right? So so a dog showing devotion to its master by fighting others. Right, so it's actually, you'd say, oh, he's a devoted dog, right? But he's also a badly trained dog, right? Right, it's a master's fault in a certain sense. If you train a dog, it's a way of showing its natural devotion to its master or its prominent human, right? In its life, the family is to attack and bite everything that comes near it to protect it. So you can see it's devotion. right? Its intentions are right, but it's not very refined. It's not trained yet, right? And so that's the thing. So when you see a fanatic that's so loving and affectionate and has such saintly qualities in their own religious practice, but hateful of other religions, we could see it as that's devotion also, right? But like a dog that's protecting its master, right? It's a very nice. But then Swamiji always takes the analogy to the next step, right? Only the instinct of the dog is better than the reason of man, for the dog never mistakes its master for an enemy, in whatever dress it may come before it. Other places Swamiji says that a fanatic is worse than the dog. And the reason being because a dog, even though it's protecting its master, when the master itself comes in a different dress, the dog knows it can recognize its master, right? Right. So, but a fanatic, if God Himself were to show up in a different dress, you're not God. Get out of here. Get the gun, or whatever, or the cross, or whatever you need to get rid of it. What else? Something you don't recognize. And so this is the thing. So when, like an example I don't remember the verse, but there's a known verse that Swami Chaitanya quotes. It's a couplet from the Ramayana, from Tulsidas Ramayana, that's recited often. And maybe I think it's Tulsidas Ramayana, maybe the Bhagavatam, but I think it's Tulsidas Ramayana, where there's a scene where that must be Bhagavatam, where Hanuman, it's Bhagavatam. Hanuman goes to visit Krishna, right? And so Krishna, knowing Hanuman's Ishta-nishta, he has one pointed attention only to Ram. He only loves Ram. So he changes his form to that of Ram, right? And that also shows, Krishna says, whichever one may approach me, I respond. So whatever way we want God will appear that way. Shows the humility of Krishna. God's willing to adjust His form out of the sentiment and devotion and attachment of the disciple, of the devotee, right? That shows the wonderfulness of God. And Hanuman, the verse that I'm trying to remember, but I'm not remember, the gist of it, the purport of it, is he says, I know of course I love Ram most. That's the form that I've meditated on. I meditate on all the time. But I also know that you're Ram, right? I know that Ram and Vishnu and Krishna and Hayagriva and all these forms, they're the same. It's the same person in these different forms, right? So you don't have to switch the form. It's very loving that it shows that the reciprocation. However you want to be, God appears that way, right? But our Hanuman, which is an example of supreme nishta, Ishta-nishta, also knows that the one he loves is come in Krishna, as incarnate again as Krishna, right? And as incarnate again is, so people say, and so you can say, he's like we may sometimes say to somebody, don't speak too much. That person is a very strict Christian. We don't start an argument like that. But it's very sad. We have to say, don't say anything because that person only loves Ram. Don't mention Krishna, right? And sometimes it's like that, but usually it's not. Right, at least not in our circle, right? But sometimes it's like that. Don't mention Kali, they're Christian devotees, or don't mention, that's a strange thing. So this is the thing that's worse than the Swamiji. While they may have devotion like a dog, but actually they're worse than dogs because a dog still recognizes God. That's so Swamiji's. It's a very clever, unsheathed sword, even when he's giving a very polished and friendly lecture. He's an unsheathed sword, Swamiji said. Right? Even his jokes and his examples have edges and sides. They cut both going in and out, They're two-edged swords, right? Right. This kind of love is somewhat like the canine instinct of guarding the master's property from intruders. Only the instinct of the dog is better than the reason of man, for the dog never mistakes its master for its enemy, in whatever dress it may come before it. Right. One of the things, if somebody, Abbot George one time, he did this example. I won't mention specifics, but the example is good. So if somebody says, I love Krishna, right, or I love Ram, I love him, I know him, he's my friend, I grew up with him, like that, and all of a sudden, Krishna shows up, right, and you say, well, who are you? So it's like, I don't know who you, get out of here, right? That makes you think. Abbot George is also a double-edged sword, right, or hammer sometimes. The bludgeoning hammer can be strong, right? He said that means that person probably never knew. If I claim to, I'm great friends with Vivekananda, and then Vivekananda comes and says, who are you again? I don't know you. And then you realize, actually, probably all this time, I'm talking big, but I actually don't know. I don't actually know Swami Vivekananda, right? If you don't recognize God when He comes in different forms and He's all these different rupas, then maybe you want to know God, right? It's important, so you generate nishta in a weird way, right? Look at Sri Ramakrishna. He'd want to, he was a lover, of course, supreme lover of God, but he understood God to be Ma, right? And so when, you mentioned before, that when he said, I wanted to see how Ma is worshipped by the Christians. Right? I didn't want to see how they worship Jesus, what that other new religion that's come into our town. Right? He said, oh, the one I love, they're also worshiping her. I wanted, but I only looked from outside, although I didn't, because there were some caste considerations, He didn't want to lose his caste and not be allowed back in the temple by being known to go into a Christian church. But he wanted to see how his God is being worshipped in another religion, in another guise. Right? So Sri Ramakrishna is a perfect example of the opposite of Swamiji's point, He recognized the one he worships, and that's the instruction we're given. Myself, given this time of initiation, we try to share similar things, that we view that while we may have an ishta, we may have a mantra that we're given, right? We should always see that that all forms are forms of our ishta, all divine names are different names of the mantra we have is our name, but there's many names, right? And so not only not to get confused that there's many names, everybody chants, but we'll chant in meditation, our focus, we chant to the one. But when we're at another place, we just see how my Lord is being worshipped, right? And we can take part in any ritual, in any ceremony, any kirtan, any bhajan, any puja, any pilgrimage, because it's the one we love is being worshipped there, right? So anyway, this is important.
What is that line? The Swamiji said where he said the instinct of a dog is even better than the reason.
And the reason of man.
What a
yeah. So not even reason. He didn't say that the instinct of a dog is better than the fanatic. He said the instinct of a dog is better than the reason of man, because man was all actually we don't know the difference. But the simple thing, a simple animal is pure, Their emotions are pure. Their devotion, even biting people who try to enter the house, is pure, actually. But it's dog-like. That's what dogs do. They have a pack mentality. There's a whole psychology of it, We watched 1,000 episodes of Dog Whisperer when it was on. We learned all about dog psychology. Right. It was a fun show and during this time. But it also showed that they have their own dharma. Right, but the thing is, a dog's dharma in many ways is, humans at their best usually don't match up to dogs and animals at their worst, right? Because at their worst, they're living. These are pure instincts. These are self-preservation, their family, their protection, they're like that. We twist things, and the more sophisticated we get, the more twisted we get, not the simpler we get, right? Learned ignorance, as Swamiji said, right? Again, the fanatic loses all power of judgment. Personal considerations are, in his case, of such absorbing interest that to him it is no question at all of what the man says, whether it is right or wrong. But the one thing that he's always particularly careful to know is who says it. This is an interesting thing. It's not what you say; it's who says it, right? Is it in my book? Did my guru say that, right? Not whether what the person said is true, right? So we think we should be devotees of truth. We should want to know the truth, right? But we're not after the truth. We're after. That's unfortunate. Often we're not after the truth, right? One interview with the famous interview with the Dalai Lama, he says, what if somebody were to prove scientifically that Buddhism is not true? Well, then we reject Buddhism. We're after truth, not Buddhism. He says, but I don't think they're going to prove Buddhism true. That's like Buddhism's not a thing to disprove. It's not that type of thing, right? But that line is very important. I'm a devotee of truth, not of Buddhism, right? We think we make our religion and our religious conception our deity rather than God our deity. Right, so these are very big things. And before talking about bhakti, you have to start with this, right? The same man who is kind, good, honest, and loving to people of his own opinion will not hesitate to do the vilest deeds against persons beyond the pale of his own religious brotherhood. That we've seen. And that's the thing. It's very confusing. You've seen it enacted on TV in our streets here. You know, it's like the people who are carrying torches and hate symbols through the streets. They also love their kids and take care of their. And they're. I mean, it's like they're. Everybody loves their kids. Everybody loves their parents, and sometimes loving their kids and their parents is generating them to scream hateful things down, scary things in the streets. Right. This is this confusing thing. You know, it's devotion, but it's not. It's not refined. It's a vile form of devotion. It's not pure bhakti. Right. That's the thing. So it's not really given the full name bhakti.
Misplaced identification.
It's many things. It's many things. It's not an easy. But this danger exists only in the stage of bhakti, which is called gauni bhakti, or preparatory stage. When bhakti becomes ripe and has passed into the form which is called pada, or supreme, no more is there any fear of these hideous manifestations of fanaticism. So this is, in the Katamrita, there's a whole huge, complicated chapter. I think discussion was Vijay Krishna Goswami on this Vaidhi bhakti, or guna bhakti, and there's different, there's sadhana bhakti, Vaidhi bhakti, guna bhakti, or gauni bhakti. These are one category. And then there's pada bhakti, raga bhakti, vimukta bhakti, and the Narada Bhakti Sutra. There's different terms like that. These are, so, sadhana bhakti, guna bhakti, this is the beginning stage of the devotion. This is when we express our devotion through sadhana, right, which is through, like for instance, listening to satsangs, right, chanting our mantra, right, going to temples, reading scriptures, giving in charity, doing prostrations, going on pilgrimage, controlling our food, fasting on holy days, observing festivals. You know, these are the details of sadhana, right? These are given in the scriptures. They're given by the guru, right? Take a bath, it properly. You know, it's like so. These are the details of bhakti yoga, right? Details of religion and spiritual practice, right? Pada bhakti, or nirgun bhakti, or vimukta bhakti, or different languages. Swamiji says pada bhakti is love. You're absorbed in the ecstasy of love. That's that first in his definition. One single moment of the madness of extreme love of God brings us eternal freedom. That's pada bhakti, right? In pada bhakti, one does not have to wonder how many times did they count. They use the right finger. No, you're not supposed to do it this way. You're supposed to do it this way. Right, there's a difference. The Guru tells you to count this way, not this way. Right, that's important, in one sense. Right, but at the pada stage, it's to say that's important. It's madness. Right, who cares whether you cross this way or this way? You know, in the beginning, that's a sectarian difference. If you do this or you do that, right? But it doesn't matter, right? And so the things that we call that in the realm of fanaticism are always in the realm of Vaidhi bhakti, right? Because then also our spiritual practices, we have intense attachment to them, and we have, and sometimes they're difficult. It's not easy to live a life of austerity and sadhana and practice, and waking up and cold showers and this and food restrictions and all these type of things, and so many japa, so many times a day. Being nice to devotees, and you don't always feel to be nice to devotees, although whatever the details of the sadhana, but that's required. But from that, the fanaticism we see in religious groups and in religious devotees and in bhaktas is at that level, right? Because perhaps it's because we're trying to generate nishta. We're trying to do something difficult, right? We're trying to follow regular principles and not forget God. And then pretty soon to not forget God, you begin to really be angry at everything that makes you forget God, right? And or we're trying to understand and focus on one particular religious conception, and we get annoyed and even nasty towards other religious conceptions.
Instead of building a fence around, you're throwing rocks at the
animals. Yeah, throwing rocks at the goats. Yeah, that's very nice. Instead of building a fence around the tree, you throw rocks at the goats and the right. So that's not, but that's going to always happen. If it happens to those who aren't practicing sadhana, and in the yoga community, in the yogi or devotee community, the practitioner community, right, the sadhaka, the aspiring community. It happens if it happens at the Vaidhi Bhakti level, at the Guna Bhakti level, right, at the sadhana level, never at that highest level. So Sri Ramakrishna, the way he phrases it, he says everything so beautifully. He says all jackals howl the same, right? So so of course, let's analyze. Let's look at Saint Augustine's confession and compare that to Shankaracharya's Vivekananda. Right? They're not the same. They're not, but that's not exactly. It's not that they say the exact same thing in the exact same language and are focused on the exact same philosophical points, right? But there's at a certain level, right? The saints of all religions speak the same. That's the thing. It gets confusing when you see people that we want to think of as saints, that are saints of religions, but they hate other religions. Right, that's a strange, because that's also a phenomenon, right? That's an interesting thing, You're welcome to come if you like. Maybe you can come sit. We're just reading from some of Vivekananda's books. There's a chair if you want to sit there. Or you can sit here or inside as you like. You can sit. We okay? Okay. What was I saying?
Battery on this is going to go soon. I'm going to get another battery. And then when I come back, we can just pause 10 seconds.
Okay.
But you keep talking.
Yeah, no problem. So, the saints. So that's a problem when you have saints of. But if you dig into their life, right, very often you'll see the ones that we really have great inspiration, that these are the great mystics and saints of other religions, right? They will demonstrate an openness towards the saints and traditions of other people, right? Like you look at Saint Francis, he's a classic example. He's the most popular saint that other religions worship in the Christian church, right? And we know he did a lot of preaching. He went on preaching tours, walking tours. But there's recorded examples of him going to during the crusade. He went on preaching tours and not on fighting tours in the crusade, right? And meeting with religious leaders of the Muslim religious leaders, right? And having respectful discussions about the truth of both religions and like that. These are documented discussions, right? And so you have examples like that of great saints of different religions howling the same, to use this Ramakrishna's example. But also, in the light of Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda's teachings, sometimes we use the fact that they howl the same as the example that they're jackals. That the real mystics, at the ultimate level, will say the same or similar things, right? If they don't say that, if they're only finding fault with every other tradition, right? Then maybe they're saints in the eyes of their followers, not in the eyes of this other larger example. There was a sadhu, religious leader. He was coming. He had honestly, I don't remember his name. It's probably good. I don't want to criticize even aggressive people like him. But at the Kumbh Melas, he was always there, and he spent 24 hours a day, microphones like that, criticizing everybody else at the Kumbh Mela. Every other yogi, every other sadhu is being criticized and critiqued. He's the only real avatar. Everybody else is wrong, one by one. Everybody, no matter he's criticizing some who are definitely frauds, but he's criticizing Ramakrishna mission and this and that. The Shankaracharyas are all crooks, and I'm the only, like this. He very frighteningly, he was actually because he was involved he was a known criminal and involved with the mafia. And there was a mob hit against him. He was killed on the way out of Kumbh Mela, right? So that was his. Yeah, he was shot. Yeah, his car was gunned down on the way to Benares. And when it spread around the sadhus, the Kumbh Mela, it's like, well, that's bad, but You know, he spent his whole time criticizing and wrong people. But anyways, there's a story. My Swami Omananda, our sannyas guru, he was walking, because they're in a prominent position. I walk by their tent every single day, you know, on the way to Sangam and the other two friendlier tents we'd stop. And so one time walking by, his disciples, he was not there, went and grabbed Swami Oman and brought him in. Right? They said, "Oh, you come have our food and here have some literature and this type of stuff." And he was trying to get out of it, not trying to get out of it. And then Swami, but then they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He says, "Well, what do you think of Maharaj? What do you think of Maharaj?" Right? And Swami Omananda was saying, "I'd rather not say anything." Right? I don't know you don't know me. What does it matter what I think? I should go. I have some appointment. No, you have to tell. Will I tell you? Can I tell you frankly? He says, "I was told, and I've always believed, that everybody has some good in them. Even the bad person, a murderer has good in them." Right? He said, "But today I've heard about somebody who has only bad." Like what he said, very strong, because if you can see good in somebody, it means you have some good. But if you see only bad in others, it means you have no good. And then he jumped into the crowd and disappeared. Very strong, right? But so that's like that person. People are thinking he's an illumined saint, right? But by Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna standards, it's not. He doesn't fit that category, right? Anyways, back to. Okay, sorry, we'll switch. Yeah. Yeah, Arati will come a little bit. What time is it now?
What time is it? Sorry, if we are here, there's
I'm the priest. What time is it now?
15 minutes.
Wait, 15 minutes. We'll go. Okay, yeah. Yeah, on Saturday we do a little reading and then we go in. That's all. It's also nice. Weather is nice. It's a duni and the beautiful environment. Huh? Okay. We're reading Swami Vivekananda. So he says, when bhakti has become ripe and it passes into the form which is called pada or supreme, no more is there any fear of these hideous manifestations of fanaticism. That soul which is overpowered by the higher form of bhakti is too near to God, to the God of love, to become an instrument for the diffusion of hate. That's a beautiful definition. A real bhakta at the highest state is so close to the God of love, he cannot be an instrument of hate. It's perfect. It's a perfect definition. It is not given to all of us to be harmonious in the building up of our characters in this life. Yet we know that the character is of the noblest type, in which all these three, knowledge and love and Raja Yoga, are harmoniously fused. Three things are necessary for a bird to fly: the two wings and the tail as a rudder for steering. Jnana is the one wing, bhakti is the other, and Raja Yoga is the tail that maintains the balance. For those who cannot pursue all these three forms of worship together in harmony, and take up therefore bhakti alone as their way, it is necessary always to remember that forms and ceremonies, though absolutely necessary for the progressing soul, have no other value than to lead us on to that state in which we feel the most intense love of God. This is that same guna bhakti that we have to understand. Even if we're not practicing other forms of yoga, only exclusively bhakti, that the details of our bhakti are meant to generate love, right? They're not the goal, they're not the aim in itself. The purpose of puja is to feel God, not to do puja. Yeah, you have to know, understand. There is a little difference in opinion between the teachers of knowledge and those of love, the Jnanis and the Bhaktas, though both admit the power of bhakti. The Jnanis hold bhakti to be an instrument of liberation. The Bhaktas look upon it as both an instrument and the thing to be attained. Right, so this is that some hold that, devotion's okay. By devotion, one attains liberation. Right, but the pure bhakta, like Narada says, that the path is bhakti, but the goal is also bhakti, right? So the goal is not liberation; the goal is itself. Love, you don't love somebody to get them to let you to give you something, even if it's freedom. You love somebody because you love them. The reason you fall in love with somebody is to love them, not to go beyond that, right? This is the idea. So But Swamiji says, to my mind, is a distinction without much difference. In fact, bhakti, when it is used as an instrument, really means a lower form of worship, and when this lower form is further cultivated, it becomes inseparable from the higher form of bhakti. So actually, with the, and I was thinking the same thing as I was speaking, that the bhakti as a path, that's Vaidhi bhakti, sadhana bhakti, guna bhakti, right? And God bhakti as the goal is pada bhakti, right? So they're not two different things. They're not. So the goal, the path is the practices of bhakti, and the goal is the fruition of bhakti, actual love, right? To quote Swamiji once again, his perfect definition: one single moment of the madness of the extreme love of God brings us eternal freedom. That's a good one to tattoo. That's your next tattoo. Each seems to lay great stress upon its own particular method of discipline, forgetting that with perfect love, true knowledge is bound to come unsought, and that at the end, true love is inseparable from perfect knowledge. I think we can. Let me see where we are here. Maybe I won't be able to finish the section. Actually, he quotes a bunch of verses from the Upanishads and the Yoga Sutra, and it gets very complicated. I'm going to skip this to round it out. It's important, but it's not important necessarily for the discussion. So bhakti is love, and he's quoting Patanjali's love for that Ishvara is bhakti, that love for that. So love for whom? That's the question. That ultimately, what is bhakti? Love for? Because regular love is wonderful. Even love between people, mother to child, relationship and friendship. This is love also, and we consider it divine because it has a flavor of bhakti. But bhakti is only love for God. That's Narad himself has said that. So love for whom? For the Supreme Lord Ishvara. The next chapter will be him defining what Ishvara is. That's a very important philosophical point. What we'd call God, I guess, in common English. Love for any other being, however great, cannot be bhakti. For as Ramanuja says in his Sri Bhashya, quoting from an ancient acharya or great teacher, from Brahma to a clump of grass, all things that live in this world are slaves to birth and death, caused by karma, and therefore cannot be helpful as objects of meditation, because they are all in ignorance and subject to change. So anybody we worship, he says, this is beautiful, from Brahma, Lord Brahma, to a clump of grass. The other thing they say, from Indra to Indrajit, from Lord Indra to an ant, right? These are the full extents, right? They're all born and they all die. Right, they're all so love for them is not freeing. It's natural. A loving person has natural loving relationship, but that's Ishvara is beyond the world of Maya. We have to love the thing is beyond Maya to become that love, taste of which frees us forever from Maya. In commenting on the word anurakti used by Sandaliya, the commentator Swarupeshwara says that it means anu, after, and rati, attachment. That is to say, the attachment which comes after the knowledge of the nature and glory of God. Else, a blind attachment to anyone, such as wife or children, would otherwise any type of attachment would be bhakti. We plainly see, therefore, that bhakti is a series of successions of mental efforts at religious realization, beginning with ordinary worship and ending in supreme intensity of love for Ishvara. So I think we'll end there. Next week, God willing, we can read the philosophy of Ishvara, and he gives a very interesting. I'll do one thing. He says he gives a very complicated discussion on what Ishvara means, using all these different scriptures and commentators, right? But then but that's meant, I think, as attention to the big release. But for a lover, these things don't matter. A bhakta doesn't care about these things. Right, we should know. I mean, it's helpful to know what Ishvara mean, what does it mean, but all these too much philosophy. Beautiful line. I'll read this one line. He no longer reasons or believes; he almost perceives. He no longer argues; he senses. and is not seeing God and feeling God and enjoying God higher than everything else. So once you know God and feel God, then these philosophy is at a much lower level. Okay? But that Swami Bhajanananda from Krishna Anubhava from Vrindavan, from Varshana, we've discussed this before, but I think it's a very important point. He says like the reason his guru had him study philosophy and religion and like this stuff is for to understand what is what and not become fanatical and have clear understanding. So it has some benefit as part of Vaidhi Bhakti and Sadhana Bhakti to also think a little bit some philosophy. But the goal is not philosophy. The goal is ecstatic love for God. Hari Om Tat Sat. Any comments, questions, challenges? Cut off my head. This is the 4 yogas from Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda. You can put these two. Yeah. He's waiting. Duni Mata waiting for you. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Jai Ma. Jai Ma. Yeah, careful.
Photo there.
Okay, you can take. No problem.
Swami, Guru.
No problem.
Swami, this photo.
Yeah, okay.
Today.
Lucky
Day.
Jai Ma.
We are came from India.
Which part of India? You say? In Hyderabad. Achha.
Hindi aate hai aapko?
Almost, a little bit more.
Hamara ghar is near Ramakrishna mission.
No, in Hyderabad. And the Murti in Hyderabad, very beautiful.
But we are not devotees.
That means only a non.
Oh.
How long are you in California for?
7 months.
7 months. Then again returning? Visiting?
Swapna?
Oh, that's also very nice. Sarita is another second India.
How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you. Is your first visit here? Or?
Lucky day.
Definitely.